Hello again. Welcome to the webinar, Shop Talk Back Talk. This is going to be a recap of one of the commerce industry's biggest events held 2 weeks ago in Las Vegas. If you were there, we are here to reinforce your learning. If you weren't there, we're here to fill you in on what you missed. My name is 𝗶𝗲𝗆. I'm with the Publicis Commerce marketing team, and I'm going to be the host today. I don't know if the webinar is going to be quite as snarky as the title might suggest, but we are going to give it a try in a couple of spots. First thing I want to do is warn you, we're here to discuss Shop Talk. I'm going to do my best to pronounce it that way, but there's a really good chance some point during the next hour, my Bronx accent is going to come through and you're going to start discussing Shop Talk. If that happens, don't worry, the topic will not have changed. Here's the agenda. Just take a second to look through because that's all it will take. We're going to kick things off with a brief overview of the event, run through the key themes that we're going to be covering in depth during our panel discussion. And then we'll dive right into that panel discussion where two of the foremost thought leaders on commerce marketing, not just within our ranks at Publicis Commerce, but across the industry, are going to offer their perspectives on the key themes that they experienced at the show, with experience being a very important word in the discussion. Then we're going to leave some time at the end to field questions from you folks out there in the audience, and you can send those in at any time during this discussion using the formal Q&A function down there on the menu at the bottom of your screen. Also, maybe we can invite you to send us your thoughts on some of the key themes that you heard, some quotes or use cases or recommendations that you got out of it if you were there as well, just to add to some of the learning that we're going to be getting here today. Now, we'll take a look at the overview of the event. I'm sure all of you here are familiar with Shop Talk, or you probably wouldn't have joined the webinar. Even if you haven't attended the show, you've heard a lot about it. But just to make it official, Shop Talk is one of the premier retail events on the industry calendar. Every year brings together thousands of professionals, retailers, brands, technology companies, startups in particular, because that's always been a key part of the show, and the investors that are there to check out the startups, as well as a variety of media representatives, all to talk about the current state of retail and the future of retail. Started back in 2016, and it really only took a couple of years for it to become one of the premier events for the industry. I went the first time in 2017. I've gone pretty much every year, I think, except one. Since then, that's not a brag. I have so many shows in Las Vegas over the years. I would never brag about going to one, but this one is an interesting one to attend. Shop Talk officially announced 10,000 attendees this year. That's kind of the same general number they've been releasing for the last few years. Still a really big event, an important event, but maybe not growing like it once did. They also announced 5,000 new attendees. And that's great because that means there's a lot of fresh energy and a lot of new thinking at the event. But it also kind of implies that there were a good number of attendees from the past who didn't feel the need to come back. We certainly saw that across our client organizations and retailer partners, just not as many familiar faces this year. Now, of course, along with the 900 exhibitors and the 200 speakers in attendance, there was Little John. Shop Talk always hosts a second night beach party on the lovely shores of Mandalay Bay's pool. For some reason, they always seem to get a hip hop artist who's not quite at the top of the charts anymore to headline the event. This year, it was Little John. Now, we all know that overused expression, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. It's usually somewhat appropriate for the Shop Talk beach party. We won't say any more about that. Now, new technology, as I said, is a key aspect of the show. So I thought I'd mention the companies that won the annual startup pitch competition this year. Kind of gives you a feel for the solutions that were top of mind this year. So we had Sotira, which helps companies find ways to monetize overstock. We had customized consumer gaming from 𝗶𝗲𝗆, Big Sur AI with personalized shopping solutions, Leica World with scalable AI video, Retail Ready with automated warehouse compliance, and Shoppeaks, not sure about the pronunciation there, but they do instant digital storefronts for brands. So just to give you a feel of some of the new technologies out there. Okay, and now before we get into the formal panel discussion, just wanted to hit on all of the main themes that we heard during the show. These are the 7 topics that our panelists are going to be diving into in just a second. Our plan here today is to give you the insights, enough insights so that you don't feel bad about not being there, or if you were there and couldn't get to as many sessions as you wanted to because you had to put out some fires back in the office, or because you missed most of Thursday because you ended up in the pool at the Little John concert and you stayed out a little too late afterwards. So first one, delivering experiences that are going to resonate with consumers, influence their behavior, and drive loyalty across all forms of consumer engagement, as we're going to discuss. This was the hottest topic at the show. Next was optimizing retail media with the emphasis on optimizing. Less talk this year about how great retail media is and all the things it can do. More talk about how to make it great, which was good to see. Artificial intelligence, similarly, the discussion was far more pragmatic this year. Less talk about it being a game changer, more talk about how it's already changing the game. Leveraging social commerce, the power of social media as a tool for engagement and sales in general, but also a lot of conversation about the critical roles of influencers and content creators in all aspects of marketing. Building loyalty, creating formal programs that will drive behavior and lifetime value, but also more generally talking about building communities of followers that will stay loyal and help evangelize the brand to other consumers. And then finally, connecting commerce, using all of these concepts, many others, to provide a seamless shopping experience for consumers by building a more aligned internal organization. And then we'll wrap up with some other key takeaways, things that didn't quite fit into any of those 6 buckets that we thought might still be noteworthy to mention. And with that, I would like to ask our panelists to turn on their mics and turn on their cameras, and we will get started with the discussion. As I said, we are delighted to have 2 leaders in the commerce marketing ecosystem here with us, and happy to be working alongside them as well. They've really been helping guide the industry forward, and so we're happy to have their perspectives here today. We've got Andy Murray, who is founder and executive chairman of Saatchi. Andy, hello, and thanks so much for being here.
Hello, Peter. It's great to join you and Amy and everyone else.
And we have Amy Andrews, who is president of Mars United Commerce. Amy, hello, and thank you.
Thank you for having me. Excited to talk about this.
Okay, so if you're both ready, we will just jump right in with the first key theme, and that is delivering experiences. Experience was the most popular word, most used word at the show. Most often used in the context of the physical store, but also discussed in the context of just about any other method of consumer engagement. Andrew Lipsman, the industry analyst, predicted that experiential is going to be the next frontier for advertising. It's kind of like a call to marketers to kind of take a step back on the intense focus on digital media efficiency, to remember that they need to engage consumers through relevant moments and impactful messaging, not just through ad placement. Now, Amy, we've got a quote here on this slide and an image that comes straight from the panel discussion that you moderated on commerce media. So if maybe you could start us off here.
Yeah, absolutely. It was definitely the word of the show. I think at the Little John party and every other happy hour event, we were joking that if it was a drinking game and you said experience, we wouldn't be standing up in Vegas because it was expressed so many times. What's interesting is I led a panel that was titled Pushing the Limits of Retail Media. It had nothing to do with experiences, and that was the word of that panel as well. So, Peter, you referenced some of the images on this slide. I was joined by 𝗶𝗰𝗆𝗆 from Sam's Club, who leads their MAP Retail Media Network. He said everything that's old is new again, and Sam's Club is looking at those experiences and bringing back things like the taco truck that you see here in the parking lot. And I think that's just a really interesting example because, Peter, to your point, when we talk about retail media, the conversation to date has really been about performance and data and how do we drive efficiency. And I know that's our second topic, so we'll talk more about that today as well. But, you had Harvey talking about taco trucks. You have the quote from Aaron from Nordstrom here as well. talking about building an experiential network instead of a transactional network. Nordstrom's is doing, their version of taco trucks is, yurts in the store for the holidays, and a new swim shop that's all about experiential. So I just think it's really, it was refreshing to think about coming back to the human beings that we are reaching with any of our marketing messages, and thinking a bit more than just the data point and the efficiency on what is the end-to-end experience that we as marketers should be delivering to these people who are asking, to shop at our stores or buy our products. So I thought it was great that we were kind of coming back to that what's old is new again, and just kind of see that conversation shifting a little bit.
Okay, great. Andy, what are your thoughts around this topic?
Well, I would echo what Amy said. I thought it was exciting to see experiences come back into the conversation set. And if I look at experiences from a shop, what was the Shoptalk experience? Let me start there. It was a little different this year. I think, as you pointed out, less on shiny new. And I would say more on how do you harmonize the different bits and bots of what we've got to work with to get to performance. I mean, the backdrop of this, probably fewer brands went than last year. And they're under a lot of volume pressure to start showing some volume growth. So performance is definitely key. And when you start talking about the store experience, I'm excited to see that get more airtime. And for my time at Walmart, we found that 9s and 10s on the Net Promoter Score to drive those surprise and delight moments are definitely exciting and fun to see. But what actually drives the growth more so, or has a bigger impact on the customer promoter scores, as we called it, was in reducing the dissatisfiers. And there is still a lot of friction in the total experience from, what it's the impact on out of stocks or not being able to check out properly and then that kind of stuff. So as I look at it, I think there was a healthy amount of discussion on reducing dissatisfiers and taking friction out of the advertising, the commerce kind of gap that exists, alongside the surprise and delight moments. But yeah, so I thought that was a healthy thing. I did see one thing on the floor as I walk around through that space. And by the way, Amy will tell you that experience was on everybody's booth, that alongside of the word commerce. But I did see some interesting things that show that harmonization is starting to come together. Interesting to see 𝗶𝗰𝗋𝗃, in-store audio, radio, if you want to call it that, where they've really started to pay attention to the audio experience of a shopper, and then being able to measure down at a store level in a performance-based way by day part, what's that experience like, measure that experience, and then link it back to the retail media and other pieces. So like that did not exist, a few years ago. So it's nice to see that harmonization of in-store experiences start to come to life.
I would add to that too, Andy. It's nice to see some of the innovation coming in store and not just online and digital, because we know that over 80% of people are still shopping in stores day in and day out every week. So I think we've, as an industry, kind of seen the innovation in AI and outside of the store environment. So it's nice to see that in the store space, and to your point, have those vendors who are not just innovating, but helping us optimize performance there too. So that the argument is not, I can measure it in digital, but I can't measure it in the store. I think we're starting to see that evolve as well.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think also the in-store is often sometimes seen just too transactionally oriented. And we know from our research that 85% of decisions in store are still based on emotion, and paying attention to that as an emotional moment of truth. That's where that surprise and delight can make a difference. The treasure hunt, the different things that lift the emotions of that in-store experience. So it's good to see it move beyond just a transactional environment.
Yeah, and it's funny, the last thing that I asked my panelists, who I mentioned Harvey and Aaron, but our final panelist was Jenna Griffith from PayPal, which is great to have a company like PayPal in the retail media conversation. But I asked everyone, like, what's the one thing that you wish you could measure? And Jenna said, I wish I could measure how people are feeling, which I think directly speaks to that, Andy, and is so great. Because if we could get to that, it's getting to that ultimate, like why behind the buy, instead of, are we measuring, did someone purchase? Well, did they reluctantly? Did they wish they could have gotten something else? All that. So I love that point from Jenna of maybe something we could aspire to as an industry in terms of measurement.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, great. And while we're not going to be talking specifically about measurement as one of the key themes, that of course was a thread that ran throughout everything, the need to measure everything. And as you're saying, the need to go deeper into measurement, not just looking at the ROAS, but all of the reasons behind what's going on. Okay, great. So we'll move into the second theme, and we've already sort of segued toward this already, and that is optimizing retail media. Obviously, no big surprise that retail media was one of the biggest topics on the agenda, but it didn't quite have the overwhelming presence that it's had in the last couple of years, either on the stage with the number of speakers talking about it or among the sponsors and the signage around the show. And also the discussions were a lot more pragmatic about how to do it right rather than just hyping up what it can do. And now I know, Andy, you had some thoughts on this topic when we interviewed you at the show, so maybe you can start us here.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Peter, that it didn't seem to have the same relevance in terms of the mystery and the excitement and the hype, which was good. But I think the thing that struck me is the amount of times the retail media network conversations from the stage were linked to the question of the marketing funnel and where does it fit? How does it align? And then that led to several panel discussions I heard around, is the marketing funnel even relevant as a framework? And if you look at the impact the marketing funnel has had in our industry, it really has been a framing device on upper funnel, lower funnel, some middle funnel, so much so that most organizations on the brand side are organized around those particular areas of the funnel, and it's become an organizational concept to go with it. And so therefore, does this collapse the funnel? Does the upper funnel work the same? And I think the interesting conversation that I heard most interesting was the one by Google near the end around how they're embracing a different approach, which is the 4S's, as they call it, which originally came from Bain. More recent research out that it's not really a funnel anymore. It's really streaming, scrolling, searching, and shopping. And those are really that's a better way to look at it. And in addition to that, we're finding the influential touch points in each of those four categories. Now, I love that. And I think that is a more interesting way. I just hope we don't take it as an organizing principle. And all of a sudden we've got the stream team, the scroll team, and the search team. That will only make our lives more difficult than less difficult. So, and the other thing I would say on the retail media side is those that seem to be making the most progress, at least as shared from the presentations, were those that probably had at least 20, 30% of their business in DTC, might have been born through DTC. And they're looking at KPIs like CAC, cost of customer acquisition and lifetime value, LTV, as more expansive metrics to really look at the value. So the DTC players, I think, were coming on strong in terms of from the stage of their use and deployment and understanding of how to get the most out of retail media networks. What did you see, Amy?
Yeah, I think definitely, well, one, agree. It was not as much of the hot topic on the panels, even though it may be an indication that my panel was on retail media, but we ended up talking a lot more about experiences, and those are obviously intertwined. But I think what's always great about Shop Talk and these conferences is all of the conversations that happen between the panels and between the presentations when we're together. And I feel like a lot of the conversations that we were having are where you were just going, Andy, around KPIs and what are the right KPIs? What are the right objectives for retail media? So I agree. I think actually at a previous grocery shop, I talked about kind of the death of the funnel. I think we've become very rigid around the funnel and let that drive some of the decisions instead of taking a step back and saying, what are the objectives that we, in whatever organization you're a part of, align to, and what are the KPIs that we're going to use to measure those? And I think, step one is alignment, which is obviously easier said than done. But I think I love where you're going with some of the D2C first brands on, is there a different way that we should be thinking about the objectives for retail media? Or just having that clarity of, maybe it's not a one-to-one. I think rarely it is with traditional media. But if we're making an investment in retail media and there's some other benefit that we get with the retailer, how do we all align on how we quantify that if we want that as a KPI. And if not, we can make different decisions. But I think there's some interesting conversations, going on with our clients now in that space, and certainly in the, massive Vegas hallways of Shoptalk around how do we, per this headline, how do we optimize? And in order to do that, I think it's how do we have alignment on what are those objectives and how are we going to track those KPIs?
Yeah, and you brought up a point there that sparked an insight for me around the retail media in general. I think 2 or 3 years ago, we were hearing some retailers talk about it's not retail media, it's just media. And I think that's really evolved, and it was really clear at Shoptalk where those that seem to be getting better results have looked at it as an omni-channel tactic that's integrated and thoughtfully put together in a JBP with the plans on how to optimize the in-store space or the in-store components, along with other things like social commerce, and how does it all come together versus treating it as a standalone by itself area or channel. And I think that's a healthy shift in the conversation.
Absolutely. And I think that's from the, that certainly resonates from the brand manufacturer side, but also I think for all of these new players coming into the broadest definition of how we're defining retail media in the same way, if you're a retailer, however we want to define that, right? PayPal is on the retail media panel. If you're someone who's looking to start a retail media network, how do you think of it similarly as a way to deliver a total experience instead of just another platform to monetize?
Yeah, totally.
Okay, and we'll move on to our next key theme, which is
I thought
activating.
this was going to be the word of the show. I didn't think it was going to be experience. I thought it was going to be AI. So I'm surprised
Me
this
too.
is
I
third and
was
not
surprised.
first. Yeah.
Yeah, and to that style point there, I don't know if I actually heard anyone say artificial intelligence. AI is good enough now, and forever shall be. We won't need to use it. It's going to be like a zip code or an IBM. Here, similar to retail media, less talk about how AI is going to change the industry, a lot more talk about how it's already changing the industry, both behind the scenes by making operations a lot more efficient and effective and faster, and also through a lot of different consumer-facing activations, especially in the context of search, where conversational search, natural language search engines, as well as new visual tools are changing the essence of product search and also giving consumers more control over their search experience. Amy, if we could start with you on some of the themes you saw around this topic.
Yeah, sure. I think similar to retail media, it was interesting to see some of this discussed on stage, but a lot more of it was kind of in the hallways because it wasn't as much of a topic as I thought it might have been. Although, Peter, you led with some of those winners. So definitely, I think in the startup space and on the floor, we were seeing more vendors and new entrants in the AI space. So that's exciting. What I heard the most and had the most discussions with different attendees at Shoptalk was, around this quote at the bottom, that if the future is an AI agent that's shopping instead of a human being, how does that factor in with everything we just said about experience? So we're trying to create these wonderful experiences for real humans. And then how do we think about that in combination with an AI shopper? And where I think there's a huge opportunity around this, and again, where we had a lot of conversations in between the Shoptalk panels was around the first purchase. I think with AI, it makes that first purchase, as we talk about customer life cycle and lifetime value, with AI, that first purchase in any category is so much more important. So when we think about bringing people in, I think there's a different approach and different weighting to that now, because we know that there's so much automation coming after that. So that to me was a topic that I think we're going to continue to see over the next several shop talks, just because this is so integrated. Peter, to your point, like it wasn't the new news. It's just, how does this continue to evolve? So those were kind of like more where my conversations were around shop talk. I don't know, Andy, if you had similar or different conversations with folks or saw anything different.
Well, I agree with you. I felt like it was really coming at it from the use cases of what's really there versus the potential. Most of the potential still seems to be in the internal productivity savings, creative savings, and things like that. I went to the conference with a question around this area, and it's the first bullet point. You know, how is generative AI transforming search, and when do we think that shoppers are going to give up on the traditional methods of search? And boy, Google did disabuse me of that concept, that question, because or concern, because they hit it pretty straight on with some real data, and their recent reports on their search volumes. They've had a significant increase through at least the March 2025 data, where they've reported processing over 5 trillion searches annually. I mean, oh my goodness, that's just huge, and it's a big rise from even just last year. So, you know, that surge alone, I don't think they're too worried about it, and the Google searches are really a bit more sometimes customer relevant than what you're seeing. So I think that is an interesting point. If you look at search, I do think the traditional retailer sites have some catching up to do with some of the capabilities. I was and where AI could play a stronger role. So if I go to Google, I did this morning. A friend of mine, 𝗶𝗰𝗹𝗂𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗺 and I were chatting about, you know, buying golf clubs. And if you go to Google and you say, you know, find me golf clubs for a high handicapper. For those who don't golf, that means you're not very good. And so you really want to have some clubs that fit that. And Google came back with a really good set of search results that pointed me to the kinds of clubs high handicappers would want. I went on to 3 other retailer sites and put in the same prompt. And I put in a prompt for high handicappers and low handicappers, which are very different types of clubs, and their search results were identical. Whether that was, you know, Target, Walmart, Amazon, they just hadn't really, you know, provided that more relevant response that is you would expect now. And my expectations of what I can get through search, it continues to go up. My behavior hasn't really changed that much, and so I think there's some ways to go there. I did see a couple of things from the stage that I thought, okay, that's really cool. That's consumer facing. And one was from Meta, where they did a demo on a shampoo brand called 𝗶𝗰𝗋𝗧𝗵𝗋𝗋. And they see this ads running on Instagram and on this new shampoo brand. It's really cool. And they pause the ad, and then up come like a conversational chatbot where you can ask it, does this work with frizzy hair? Right. And then it comes back and says, oh yeah, it works with frizzy hair and it does this or that. And then you can have a conversation while you're looking at the ad around the product attributes and how it might relate to you in a more conversational way, where it also then takes you to a buy button if you want. But it helps you then sort through what scents right for me, what variant, in a really seamless, friction-free way. And I thought, okay, that's really, really cool. I shared that story with one of the clients. I said, I want to try that on one of our brands. Went back to Meta and asked them, hey, can you give me a demo on that a little bit more? And they were like, we don't know what you're talking about. So we got to, if anybody's here from Meta, can you please tell me where that demo could go and how I can get access to it? So I do see things like that I feel can be game changers for the consumer experience, but I still feel like it's going to be a while before we see it manifest in a way that could work at scale.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting too, because the examples you gave, Andy, with Google and your golf clubs and with the hair chatbot, like I think that takes us back to the experience. They're those like
That's right.
very natural human experiences. They're done in that way. I was talking to a friend recently who's very anti-AI, you know, worried AI is going to take over the world. And they said, oh, I don't do any of that. And we started talking about Google, and they were like, but isn't it great how Google kind of like summarizes it all and tells you? I'm like, that's AI.
That's
And
AI.
it's done in such a natural way that, you know, when you don't even notice and it becomes a benefit, that to me just links back to, we are focused on the experience, whether it's in store or digital.
For sure.
Speaking of AI taking over the world, before we move on, can I ask you to give us some thoughts on the operational improvements? You can't talk about AI without talking about the workforce and the future of humans working. There were a couple of things, especially this bullet point here on creative versus creativity. Wanted to get your take on that. Karen Tracy at Meta on one of the panel discussions put it as creative will be automated in the future, but creativity will not. And someone from the Aldo group mentioned that they're automating everything on the back end that no one wants to work on. So if I could just get your thoughts on the future there of humans versus the bots.
Well, the Meta conversation is really, go ahead, Amy.
Well, go ahead.
Well, the Meta conversation, I was at that presentation too, and she said something else that I thought was mind-blowing, which was every person should spend 2 hours a day experimenting and playing with AI, and if you don't, you're falling behind. And so I don't have 2 hours a day to do that. So I'm going to be definitely falling behind. But it's like, no, that's the benchmark. So that kind of shows you how big of a transition they think that's going to be. I just thought that was an interesting point on that piece, but go ahead, Amy.
No, I was just going to say on the, yes, gosh, I'm like, when can I find my 1 to 2 hours as well? But on the creativity versus creative point, I think that definitely there is a huge role for creativity that I believe will never go away. I think actually might even be more important, and probably to the point of spending that playtime in AI, like how do we bridge those two so that AI can help us come up with even better new ideas. I know what my creative team always tells me is, because AI is pulling from things that are existing in the past to be truly creative and come up with something new, we can certainly use AI for inspiration, but we need to kind of think beyond that. So I think I love AI will not replace creativity. Creative, I think, is a little bit trickier because a lot of people probably on this call are defining that differently and might have different groups within their organization or people who might have that in their title. What's exciting to me about AI and what we're talking a lot about at Shoptalk and other forums with our clients is if we are able to reach people, and we have a lot of Publicis Commerce tools to do that in terms of core ID and reaching individuals. Wouldn't it be great if we could live into what we say as marketers, where I, Amy, get a message that's perfect for me. Peter, you get one for you. Andy, you get a different one for you. Andy, probably something about your handicap. And they knew exactly what that was and can target you, with that number. That would be amazing. And I do think there's a huge component for AI to help us take those wonderful, big creative ideas and make them hyper personalized. And that's where I think there's a big role for AI in the creative conversation.
Yeah, and I also think that, there was a lot of hand wringing around when, Photoshop came online and people started using it. It's going to, get rid of graphic designers, and it really didn't. It did make it, and it really didn't even take a good designer to be a great designer. To be a great designer, you have to have craft and mastery. And I think there's a craft and mastery that's required in creativity. AI tools like Gen Canvas and others can take some of the mundane pieces out, but it doesn't really let you get to that higher order of creativity that, like you said, Amy, things that haven't been thought of yet that really are making unique connections. Maybe someday it will. I don't think it's there now.
Okay, great. Thank you. Moving on to the next theme, which is leveraging social commerce as a tool for engagement and conversion as well. eMarketer, the number there was that they expect sales through social media to double to 137 billion by 2028. It was the main topic for a handful of sessions, but also mentioned in a lot of others for its effectiveness in delivering engagement and sales. And then specifically about the importance of influencers and content creators on just about every stage of the path to purchase, also in every step in the product life cycle, which I thought was interesting as well. Andy, what were you hearing around this topic?
Well, I saw a lot more than I thought I would at the conference regarding some real results happening by leveraging the social commerce with creators and influencers. And I would think that that probably had the most stage presence in terms of case studies that you could look at. And again, the brands that were DTC born tended to dominate in that space. True Religion, Own Your True, with celebrity influence like Megan Thee Stallion and Anita, or Levi's with Beyonce and what they've done with that. Taco Bell Super Bowl ad with Liv Moss and how they leverage the customer to co-create the ads with them as creators, I thought was really, really interesting. And so I think in all those examples, though, the big, I guess, aha for me was they all talked about being really clear about their purpose as a brand. So with Taco Bell, a good third of it was on Liv Moss and what that meant to them, and then aligning the influencers and the creative creators to really come along that purpose. And so I thought that was good. I thought that was good to hear, that you have to get that brand purpose really tight for you to get the most out of it, and then align influencers and creatives at a purpose level, and then let some of the guardrails go to get the most of the personality and individualism through, but always come back to that core purpose. And we also, there was a question asked, the most influential social commerce platform to be on, and to a person, at least in the CMO roundtable, was TikTok. So I wasn't quite aware of just what kind of lead TikTok has in this space, but it is a pretty sizable lead.
Yeah, I love what you said, Andy, about starting from that core brand purpose. I do think that's where we see the best examples in this space. Certainly at Shoptalk, but even beyond that. And that's, I think, when you have that strong branding, that's when brands like Taco Bell can open it up to be more co-creating with their social influencers and other consumers. I think what's interesting about Shoptalk and even other platforms like Super Bowl, we're still seeing so many celebrities kind of leading the conversation and examples. I think the more interesting conversation that we're starting to see more of is more of those micro influencers, and how do we bring those into commerce, aligning them to specific retailers, and really, again, creating more of those one-to-one personal connections at that level. And I think we can do that a lot more at scale with tools like AI, instead of just the big celebrity conversation, which I know has a role, but I think there's going to be a shift away from that.
I agree with you 100%. A matter of fact, I was more excited about the Taco Bell example where the customer was invited to co-create. And I also think one that wasn't talked about much, but is one to be held up to go look at, is Rent the Runway, and how that they'll convince a potential customer to give up loads of personal information in order, like size, height, and everything else, and weight, in order for you to be able to share and find people like me in reviews that might be wearing that same outfit. So I could say, I want to see that outfit on someone like me. You'll give up a lot of information to get that. And then it encourages that sharing, but that creation's been done by other customers. And I think that is where the future is headed. And I hope that we see more of that kind of, consumer level co-creation creators that all participate with the brand in meaningful ways.
I think Rent the Runway is a great example too, because that's taking social content and integrating it into their platform. So, I mean, again, it goes back to Omni. You're not looking at the runway pictures on TikTok or Instagram. It's built within the site. And to your point, you're seeing people who, are your size and style and all of that. So I think Rent the Runway is a great example of that integration between social and commerce too.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, when I saw that, I felt like I was looking at the future of something that had real potential for scale, because, looking at reviews are one thing, but, how do I know those, 4,000 reviews, how many of them are like me? They buy like me, they like the things they like. And so just looking at the quantity of the reviews isn't enough. And I think this is where AI could come back in to help reinvent the review process. And Rent the Runway, I think, is the closest I've seen. Maybe there's others out there that have brought those to harmonize that AI component alongside of the consumer participation, and starting to look at how reviews can be done.
Okay, just tagging on that, Andy, before we move on, the CEO of Reserve Bar was in a session where he talked about their goal being using AI so that the ratings a consumer sees when they go to the website is their own, based on their purchase history and their behavior, rather than some pundit at some magazine somewhere. So it plays right into what you were saying. Okay.
Yeah, I saw that. I thought that was pretty clever. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Next topic is building loyalty. A lot of sessions dedicated to this. In fact, there was a whole track on it. Looking at best practices in launching and managing formal programs, but the broader conversation being establishing emotional connections and building communities of brand loyalists, whether or not they're signing up for a membership program. This is becoming increasingly important because younger consumers showing far less brand loyalty than prior generations. The stat that kind of jumped out with me was 39% of Gen Z shoppers switching brands every purchase cycle. So a need to kind of really make a connection there. Amy, if you can start us off here on what you heard.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is another example of, and probably because we're at Shoptalk, by nature, like looking at how does this intersect with commerce, social loyalty, and I love what you said about Google and the S's, like hopefully that doesn't result in a new structure and silos and all of that. So I liked the Shoptalk conversation around loyalty was, more around integration. I love this quote around community here at the bottom. Like, how do we think about loyalty as something that's integrated and not just another channel or tactic, or line item on the budget. So I was pleased that we were hearing more of that conversation. That stat stood out to me too, as well, Peter. The 39% trying different brands every purchase. I think that as we look around how loyalty is changing, it's great to see us thinking about that in a more omni-channel way as well. My 8-year-old, I just took my 8-year-old to the M&M store in New York. And we signed up for the M&M Fun Club, which is one of our programs. And I think that's just like a perfect example of total omni-channel, right? It's the store, it's the M&Ms.com, it's every retailer and retailer.com. And how do we, and he was, super into it and wanted to sign up and all of that. So like, how do we think about loyalty in a more integrated way for the next generation? I was excited to see some of these examples at Shoptalk and just how we're talking about it, being much more a part of the total experience. And again, not just a separate channel.
Yeah, one of the things that Amy and I have been talking about quite a bit is how professional sports programs and franchises have kind of taken fan loyalty, fan development to a whole new level. And I think there's some things we can learn on how professional sports are building out and think about loyalty and fan development to traditional CPG type brands or other brands. What I'm seeing is really a convergence of what we traditionally called CRM into a broader context of not just consumer relationship management, but commerce relationship management, and how do the commerce touch points through that relationship need to be managed so that we're really clear and able to follow on and build those relationships, and we can leverage segmentations of audiences that have been built. Example I saw was the 𝗶𝗰𝗹𝗂𝗧 Beauty Squad loyalty program. And again, instead of just looking at that as a traditional CRM type program, it converged that with TikTok challenge of eye, lips, face challenge, which, leveraging the TikTok social commerce into a CRM loyalty program, I thought was a bit unique. And so I think it's loyalty and CRM kind of joining the party organizationally. And many retailers, the email marketing is over here and not really integrated into a customer relationship discussion that I think is a good evolution step forward.
I love the language around that too, right? Whether it's consumer or commerce relationship management versus fandom. Like I love that we're, and I think that's why we got excited about, commerce from a sports setting. Like there is something really interesting, I think, about creating fans. And I think that resonates too with more of the younger generations. Like, how do we bring fans into it that aren't just buying on autopilot, but that are, you know, truly loyal and fans to your brand.
Okay, great. And then our last key theme, which kind of pulls everything else together in a lot of different ways, connecting commerce. Wasn't a track, wasn't a lot of sessions dedicated to connecting commerce, but again, a thread that ran through just about all of the conversations, the need for connecting commerce, both internally to align the business and externally to provide a seamless shopping experience for your consumers, was you know, discussed often, especially around the context of retail media. So Andy, with this final topic, what were your takeaways?
Well, it certainly was a theme. And I also think, to Amy's earlier point, it's something that you hear in the hallways and in the networking, which is the advantage of going to a shop talk. And what I really see happening in the space with the commerce and connecting commerce is, we all know this, right? If for especially a lot of the big brands, commerce tends to be the last in the planning, or sat at the kids' table, or you got your TV idea, and then, oh yeah, we're going to put this on Amazon or Walmart or wherever, and it's the last. And what we know to be true is that the commerce planning usually happens way ahead of the advertising development in general. And so we're seeing this conversation happening on where should the commerce conversation in a campaign development happen. And it needs to be those that seem to be doing a better job are integrating it into the very beginning briefing sessions of an idea, so that we think that through. A lot of times you have to take the brands, take a new item that you're going to sell into physical retail, comps and ideas that are way ahead of the traditional advertising development. So you can't afford to let it be the last thing to happen in the planning stages. And so just for the lead times alone. And so what I see happening is trying to work through the language. What does commerce mean? What are the constructs? What are the principles? What are the mindsets, so that we don't end up constantly chasing a gap that's between the advertising and the commerce. And I think that gap has got to close. And most often than not, it's organizational design principles and barriers and structures that are getting in the way of making that more seamless. So that seemed to be a pretty big conversation topic, at least in the hallways, on how can we connect the dots so that it is, and again, it's probably an outcome of a funnel-based design, where we look at the commerce as lower funnel than something that has to be built into the idea at the very beginning.
I could not agree more. And I know that the conversation around, you know, needing to be further out and commerce starting first is certainly one we've had for a while and continues to be a pain point. I think to build on that, I think that we've talked about kind of breaking down the funnel and, you know, what's upper or lower, and maybe that doesn't matter. I think what's interesting with some of these other topics that we've covered, like AI and social, is if we're truly connecting commerce in those spaces, how can we even challenge some of our own commerce timelines or assumptions that we've had in the past? And to your point, Andy, I think that would absolutely have to result in different organizational design. But I was talking with a client recently around how do we take advantage of a social opportunity? And they said, I wouldn't have even thought to call you guys on that because I'm social and commerce and, you know, separate teams, separate budgets. So I love that challenge too. And this client also brought up, well, you know, but we can't link it to anything that we're doing at retail because we planned that so long ago. And, you know, we had a great conversation on, well, let's think about if we can break that paradigm. Like, why couldn't we think about something to, you know, take advantage of something in social in the next 24 hours that does have a commerce outcome? Maybe it doesn't link to the plan that we did 18 months ago, but maybe there's a different avenue that we can do. So I think it goes back to what you said, Andy, on how do we define commerce, and if we are willing to broaden that definition and maybe extend the table, I think there's a lot of things that we can do and challenge for the future as well.
I agree, Amy, and I think there's still quite a bit of upskilling that needs to happen. within the marketing community in order to understand the power of commerce and how it's being leveraged today. A lot of the senior leaders in, big branded companies may not have grown up with a commerce experience in their, and it's so new. So we're still at that nascent stage. So I'll give them a bit of grace on why it's not more connected today, but it just puts a little bit more emphasis on our jobs as agency partners and others to focus on upskilling and make sure that we're working with the current best practices and really understand, how can you leverage these tools in the right way that ends up in a very connected experience than something that looks like it's been Frankenstein together.
Okay. We're coming up on time and we're wrapping up. We were just going to look at some final thoughts before I hit any of the points here on the slide. I'd love to go back to you two to get your final thoughts. Any key takeaways, any themes, any learnings that we haven't covered yet that really stood out to you at the show. And Andy, if you've got any thoughts there to start us.
Yeah, I think because of the more macroeconomic pressures of trying to get unit volume, which is a very real issue right now, we're not getting any growth through pricing. E-commerce is still the fastest growing element, unless it's premium brands or private label. You have to be growing your e-commerce side, and I think the danger in this inflection point of where we are is we're still inventing. There's still a lot to learn, and I think we have to be still investing in test and learn, even as painful as that is in the current economic pressures. I think those that are just going to lean into, I'm only going to spend on what works today that's proven, will probably get left behind, because I think the improvements and the newer things that are coming tend to be built on the backs of learnings versus just something completely out of the blue. So that test and learn mentality and mindset and innovation in that, commercial innovation is important, where many brands are really good at product innovation, but maybe that muscle of commercial innovation isn't there. And we're still in an innovation space, which is a very exciting time to be in marketing and advertising. But it's also a very challenging time, because the real quarterly business results are really chasing volume, and that volume is chasing, proved metrics, and a lot of it's still unproven.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, Peter, that speaks to your first point here. Like it's still a continuous evolution. And the image of Netflix, right? I love that billboard, but Netflix probably isn't the most relevant example anymore either, right? Like we've seen more innovation there, and how different generations are streaming and consuming different media. So I agree with everything Andy said. I think continuous evolution, and probably even more so in some of the current economic environment. I think those who are willing to take risks as we are kind of in this phase and maybe entering something new, I think that's going to be important, and that's probably where we're going to see even more innovation and probably more leaders emerge.
Yeah, Sam Walton had a great quote, Amy. It was, although we're not in a recession, but he said, a recession is a terrible thing to waste. And maybe to reframe that, challenging times are a terrible thing to waste, because
Right.
that's where the innovation and growth can happen.
I wasn't going to say the R word, Andy, but
I know. I said he said it. So
Yeah,
Peter,
and
bring us
certainly,
back up to close us out.
yeah, more positive note, please.
yes, I was just gonna say that, the discussions from this stage around the current economy were all very positive. So we should keep it that way for as long as we can. Just wanted to mention here, because the brand building is dead comment, I think probably deserves some explanation. There were a couple of people on the stage who said that brand building as a singular objective for advertising is out of date. In this world of performance marketing that we're living in. Don't know if I necessarily agree with that. But as in the case of Netflix, there were a lot of great examples of brands that continuously evolve. Shark Ninja and Stanley 1913, companies that are really looking at what's going on, listening to consumers, listening to changes in behavior, and running with it, and continuing to keep their brands fresh So a lot of opportunity out there. We should
I
wrap
tried to
things.
ignore I tried to ignore, Peter, the crazies stuff said from the stage like that. It's controversial. I mean, but I did hear Mr. Wonderful say linear TV is back and it is the way to build brands. And I'm still trying to get my head around that one. But anyway, there were a few sound bites from the stages that were like, I don't know if they're being provocative or they really believe that, but I don't see how you can survive without some attention to building your brand, whether it's ingrained into your commerce activity. I'm not sure it has to be a completely separate function. And I think that's what's changing, but brand building is not dead.
Okay. We should wrap things up here. So if we can move on to that last slide. First off, want to thank the two of you, Andy and Amy, for being here today, for providing all of these great insights. You know, you were as advertised, just a lot of great thinking on what you took away from the show. So thank you so much for being here. The learning doesn't have to stop here, though. We just yesterday published our Shop Talk recap, the trends report around the event, where we have thought leaders from 11 different Publicis Commerce companies giving us what they took away from the show, including Andy and Amy here. So you'll get to learn more from them as well. We have a lot of things planned coming up in the future. We've got some virtual webinars. We even have some live events that we've got planned that we'd love to have you back for. If you want to get a copy of the report, you can just scan that QR code, or you can go to publiciscommerce.com and get yourself a copy. But we'll also be back to you with an opportunity to review the recording of this event. And as I said, also some other opportunities for future things that we'll be putting on here at Publicis Commerce. Thank you so much. We hope you're walking away with some snippets that are going to help you with your jobs, and we hope to have you back here again soon. So take care, everybody.